You can see the patchwork party quilt is back up on the wall. That can only mean one thing. It is time for block number 4. Let's get started. It is time. That is right. Block number 4. Welcome, welcome everybody. And if it is your first time here, my name is Rob Appell from Michael Miller Fabrics. I'm excited to see you. However, you are super late to this party. Just kidding a little bit. We are working on this awesome quilt you see behind me, and it is set up as a block of the month designed by Leila, one of our one of our pattern parties. The quilt is called Patch Party, and it is super fun. One of the things I actually really like about this quilt is we're usually making multiples of the same blocks over and over again, which gives me a great opportunity to practice before I show you how to do it. And it also gives all of you the opportunity to improve your skills if that's what you're doing here with this particular project in your quilting life. So again, quilting is an adventure. I'm glad you're along for it. Now, this is a pattern that I need you to purchase, please. So the instructions are located within the printed instructions, and those links are right down in this description link below. I've got all that for you right there. We are using the Fairy Frost fabrics, and you should be able to find the Fairy Frost and Cotton Couture from Michael Miller in all of your favorite local quilt shops and online retailers. And they're also, a lot of them are carrying the pattern as well. So super great. Today we are using watermelon, what a delicious color, of our Cotton Couture, and the primrose of the Fairy Frost. And oh my goodness, it's a fantastic color combination. All of the blocks have the bright white Cotton Couture. That's the high density solid from Michael Miller. And that is our background color. And you can see it just translates everywhere and everything. And one of the things that we've learned a million years ago from Kathy Miller, one of the founders of the company, is the importance of bright white around color. It really activates everything. And we just love that. And this quilt really tells that story perfectly. So thank you again, Kathy. I hope you're still watching happily at the show from retirement out there and covered in paint. And you know what that means. At any rate, let's get into the pattern. Like I said, you will be following your instructions that you've already purchased from Leila. Again, thank you very much for that. And we are on block 4. You're going to have some squares, you're going to have some rectangles, and you'll have a little bit of smaller squares when we would get down to those. Construction on the block is super easy. It's mostly these half square triangles and these little 4-patch blocks. And let's start with those little 4-patch blocks. They're going to be super simple, and we're just going to take one of our background fabrics and the Fairy Frost fabric. You'll notice they are the same width and the same length. And so I'm just going to go ahead and put those right sides together, and I'm going to go ahead and run them through the sewing machine. Now, if you are just joining us, we are using an edge guide on our 1/4 inch foot to really ensure we have a nice accurate 1/4 inch. All of the pattern is built off of an accurate 1/4 inch, so please don't go too big or too small. Make sure you're testing as you're getting started, and once you know, then you're dialed in. Keep those measurements and we'll all be fantastic together. Let me go ahead and finish out this seam. It's a long one. And as we finish this seam, let's go ahead and get ready to press this, but I should probably tidy up a moment. And we're going to press to the darker fabric, seams to the dark fabrics when possible. In order to do that, if you haven't heard this trick, I like to hold the dark fabric in the air, keeping my lighter fabric down. Those were originally right sides together still, and then I've set the seam, and now I'm just running a nice medium light steam iron here. So I'm trying to say there's a little bit of moisture in here because I'm not using any other product, any fusibles or anything like that. So we just make ourselves a very nice, this would be considered a strip set. No matter how many you have in there, it's a set of strips, so it's a strip set. Now the reason we did this today is we actually want to subcut this down into new units so we can make easier parts and pieces later. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I want to make sure I'm always doing good quilt instruction and good quilting. I'm going to lay my seam that I just created along a line within the ruler so that I can now square this outside edge. I'm going to kind of make sure I'm going slow because it is my left hand that time and I'm not really left-handed, but you can see I got a nice clean edge. Now that that edge has been cleaned up nicely, now I'm just going to go ahead and subcut the units to the size that the pattern says, and I'm going to go ahead and just blast through these because I want to make sure, but I'm going to go slow enough to make sure I don't cut the wrong size units, if you know what I'm saying. That's never any fun. So we're going to need about 8 of these. constantly returning back to that line to make sure that I'm using that to ensure nice, crisp, square little pieces, rectangular little pieces, maybe I'm trying to say, 90-degree cut little pieces, I'm hoping to say there. Okay, so now as we're building these, like I said, we need 4 because there's 1 in each corner. 2 blocks, if I didn't say that already today. I did say that the quilt offers the same block multiple times, but today we're making block number 4 twice. Last month we did block number 3 4 times. So here we go. We're going to rotate those around to make our little 4 patches. So just checkerboard style, opposite edges. So you will have needed 8 of your subcut little strips down. Line them up like that, and let's just go ahead and strip piece these together. But as I flip them, I'm going to take the time. I want to make sure that these little seams right here, that union where everything matches up, I'm going to nest those together. So I'm kind of using my fingers, I'm kind of pushing them together, making them nice and tight in there. And then I'm going to bring it over to the sewing machine and stitch those down with that 1/4 inch. If you haven't heard the term chain piecing before, maybe it's like sausage making to you, then what we're going to do is keep lining up those seams and then bringing it over to the machine. And we're just going to sew one on after the other because we're making these same units. Making sure I keep everything nice and tidy though. Sometimes I get a little carried away with the instructions. I forget to do good sewing. No, that's not true. I always kind of forget to do good sewing. And then after your chain is finished, you can actually use the little thread cutter on the side of the sewing machine there to go ahead and cut all the little units apart. They're now blocks technically. And then I'm just going to press them over to one side. They're checkerboard, so there's not really a right or wrong at this point. And we're going to set these aside because these become the 4 corner blocks. And then all we need to do is make some half square triangles. If you look at the block closely, I'm actually stalling while I press these out. If you look at the block closely here, you can see that there are actually 2 different color half square triangles going on. So you've got your Fairy Frost and Cotton Couture combo, and then you also have your Fairy Frost or your background and your Cotton Couture combo. And what I was thinking before I said it, but I wanted to tell you all about, is I've taken all 4 of these Cotton Couture solid colors here, and I've drawn a diagonal line. I'm using now a chalk pencil. Got a lot of feedback on the Sharpie marker. I listened. And so anyways, a chalk pencil works fantastic for that. And that now is going to be our seam guide. We're not sewing on this line. We're going to use that on our sewing foot. So let me show you how that works. Go ahead and take a solid background square and a solid colored square, lay those right sides together, and you will also do the same with your Fairy Frost. So you're going to match up 2 of the Cotton Couture to the Fairy Frost, and you're going to match up 2 of the Cotton Couture watermelon to 2 of the Cotton Couture bright white, and that's a mouthful. Okay, we're going to do the same thing for all of these, and again, we could technically chain piece these if you'd like. What I really want to point out and make sure you're paying attention to is when I drop my presser foot, my edge guide is now on the other side of the line, and that just buys me a little seam allowance there. So we're going to cut through here, or excuse me, we're going to sew through here. We're not cutting anything yet. And the best way to really do these is to sew down to one end and cut your thread, lift your foot, come to the other side of that drawn line, and go ahead and restart, because we're basically making 2 of the half square triangles from each of these sets like this. If you want to chain piece them, what I prefer to do is down the sides of all the blocks. So I'm adding on one, I'm adding on a second one now, pick it up with the foot there, coming through, same seam allowance, edge guide trick there going, coming through, lift the needle, drop the foot, Sometimes it doesn't pick up on that corner, so I got to get the fabric a little closer and on through. So that is efficient. It saves time and actually a lot of thread. I'm going to cut now though, and it's really better to not try to leave these connected. I try and I can't think of a good way to explain it because it doesn't work. It's kind of terrible. So just take a moment, cut all of the ones that you've chain pieced, and then just start it over again. And you can again chain piece the second round, making sure you're going to the opposite side of that presser foot line, stitching on through. But no matter how you make them, we've got a few more steps until they're ready to be used. So we're going to go ahead and cut them apart again. And not only cut them apart that way, but now that we've got these 4 sets on the table, we need to cut them apart. And you can do it with scissors. You could do it with a rotary cutter with no ruler, or of course you could take your rotary cutter and your ruler, which is the safest way, and cut. But you're basically just cutting right along that line that you drew earlier before we started making our seam allowances. Okay, so those are all being done. And I'm also purposefully keeping the watermelon colored fabric on top here. The reason I want to do that is I want to make sure that I can go ahead and press efficiently as well. And I want to press all of them to that dark side. So again, I'm going to hold it in the air. I'm going to set the seam and I'm going to press it over. If you didn't know, Henry Ford, I believe, was part of my family because I love to work in the assembly line fashion. So you can see I just like to knock all of these out at one time, and then I'll go back in and I'll trim all of these down to the appropriate size. And once I get these pressed out, I'll show you that trick. Okay, and if you haven't seen this trick before, you really should watch more of my videos because I think I show it every time I do a half square triangle, but we're gonna square these up now. Squaring them up, we're using the 45 diagonal line on any ruler that has a 45 diagonal line on it. And your first step is we wanna just key in and we're just gonna push it up as close to the edge while looking at my diagonal line running through the patch unit itself. And I'm just really shaving. I like to shave, but I do like to work from the big part of the ruler off the corner so that I'm not hitting the tip of the ruler with my rotary cutter. Then I go ahead and I rotate it and I bring it on back down to the size I need. And now I'm lining up my corner right where I want it. I'm double checking that my lines are nice and square. And now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut off of the big edge, from the big edge off the corner, big edge off the corner. Trim down, perfect, beautiful. And now this is going to be the same size as some of our other units we had pre-cut earlier, which will fill in the block. So once again, assembly line style, focus on what you're doing. Let's trim down all of our half square triangles together. You do yours, I'll do mine, and I'll meet you back right here in a second to finish out the center and then put around the outside edges. Show you how the whole thing goes together. Super simple. Now, as I'm finishing trimming off all of the excess edges, bringing these all down to the same point, I'm at a really cool place in this particular block, which is that all of the units are now the exact same size, and they're all going to be interchangeable so you could design different things. But the point I really want to make is we're going to now lay out every unit. Like we're in block 3 last month, what we had was we had different sizes in the middle than we did on the outside edges, which became borders of that block. And so we had to handle them in different phases, different stages. So at this point, everything's the same size. We're going to build what is called a pinwheel, and we're going to start with our 4 blocks that are from our Cotton Couture and our Fairy Frost combo. Now, there is an orientation to this, so we want to make sure we get it right. So what I want to do is I want to bring my pattern into sight, and I'm just going to take one of these blocks and I'm going to first rotate it so that it matches as I'm working. Once that is done, I can pretty much do the rest of it visually, because with a pinwheel block, it's just going to checkerboard but with triangles instead of squares, and they kind of follow each other around as you go. So sometimes you have to keep rotating until it looks correct, as you see, but basically now you can tell, if I'll move my hands out of the way for you, that it is a pinwheel and it dances around. Now, the other thing we know is we know that we've got these wonderful corner blocks, and we know that the pink or the fairy frost primrose color here is going to touch into the corners. So that is very easy placement as well. Now I'm going to go ahead and down here in the bottom, I can see that I've got one of my solids. As I go around, you can see I'm actually placing the easiest things first, because I want to make sure that I leave these spaces to put in the last of the pinwheel blocks. For me, probably the easiest way to point this out is as these come together now, what you're going to form is a triangle here of the, I'm going to say, medium and dark fabrics. So if you need to, as you go around, just look for that triangle forming there. Makes it very easy to see the triangle there as it goes around. So that is your entire layout. That is the construction. And now we're just going to go ahead and build these very simply in, I like to sew in columns personally, so I'm going to move these 4 over, and I'm just going to stitch my way across. And I like to really work with everything right here in front of me next to the machine, so I can go back and forth so that I don't get anything out of orientation. So I'm just going to let you watch this time. I'm not going to speed it up, fast forward, so you can see how I handle several of these squares. So again, seam allowance comes over there, and all I really need to focus on right now is which one is my seam. I've got that edge guide on, so everything will be accurate. Sew on through. Then as I cut the thread, I really open up the seam, I drop it back in here. Now at this moment you could press, because that would actually make for very, very accurate, nice construction. So let's take, let's take a moment and do that. You can tell I'm thinking on the fly today. And at this moment, I'm going to press everything uphill because I want my seams to nest. And so in the next column, I'll press everything downhill. After coming off the ironing board and I know everything's perfect, back in my orientation, looking for that triangle, my pink primrose there matching in the corner. So now I'm going to go ahead and grab for the next seam allowance with that solid block. Bring it on over here. Stitch it on. And press this seam in the same direction you pressed the last one. So we were going uphill. So again, I'm going to press uphill. Come back to my design board and sew on that last seam for this particular column. Again, pressing in the same direction as the other seam. So you might have a little bit of a fabric where you're pressing into the lighter fabrics, but as I bring it back in here, I can see that the orientation, yes, the column's gotten a little shorter because of the seam allowances, that happens. And then I'm just gonna go ahead, the same exact format. Let's go ahead and put these two together, go straight to the machine with your eye on that seam, so you know exactly which one it was. Stitch it down. Now this time, if I just press from the second square, I'm going to be literally pressing uphill again. So now I'm going to rotate and I'm pressing from the first square into the second square. And this will shift the seam allowances heading into that opposite direction now, so that the columns will all nest together. So making sure orientation is correct. Remember, pinwheel's in the center. Flip that block over. And I think you're starting to understand the rhythm we've got going here. Okay, double checking to make sure I know which way I want to press my seam. And we're going to go ahead and set that. Perfect. Coming in, grabbing the last block in this column. We're going to go ahead and join this to the rest of the group here. And then as those seams were all pressed in the right direction here, let me just go ahead and see if I can flip this so you can see it here. What you can again notice is, again, seams are going nesting or opposite directions, which just makes it so the blocks come together and fit together so much more nicely. Let's make sure I didn't get this out of orientation right. I've got my solid background square up there. And now I'm just going to finish out these two columns real quickly and sew all of the columns back together. And I'll be back for that in just a moment. Now that the columns are all back together, it's a perfect time to double check our layout, make sure we don't have anything that got twisted or turned. I know, pinwheel, right? Because this is the best time to take it apart if we had to. We don't, we got it all dialed in, we're set. So now I'm just gonna go ahead, like I was saying earlier, is I'm gonna fold over right sides together. I'm gonna make sure that the seams nest up so that I can start at the very top corner by matching up those edges, coming into the sewing machine. And I'm now really only concerned with that first set of squares where they match up down there. And as I start to sew through, I'm making sure they're aligned. Of course, you could put a pin there if you wanted to. And then once I get right over that first union, then I go down to the second union. I make sure it matches up. And there's just enough give in these size squares that we can kind of come through and just set it each block union at a time, nesting up those seams. And when you get to the end, you'll see here that those corners just match up perfectly again, or pretty close. You know, that's as much as we need to anyways. And then I'm just going to start now pressing away from the center of the block. So I'm going to do here, out to my edge. We're going to marry the center now here. And anytime I have the opportunity, I want to put the bulk of the fabric, the heavier, larger piece on the bed of the machine, on the feed dogs of the machine. So you're going to watch me rotate this as I bring it around to make sure that that happens. Now my seams are still nested. Remember, it was just an opposites trick. And then I'm lining up that new top corner, old bottom corner. Still pinching my first block seam allowance, union there. Stitch it, line up the next one. If you need to do a little reorganizing, you can. Punch it. I was pressing away, so we're going to keep going out. Had some dirt come out of my iron and got lucky it didn't hit on the white. Okay, and now we're going to put on that last column there, making sure everything again is lined up, starting at the top corners. Sometimes your feet will try to fold that seam over, so lift the foot up, tuck it under if you catch it in time. Just line them up and stitch them down. All right, gentlemen and ladies, we are all set here. Let me show you the way this finished out. You can obviously see it up on the design wall behind me, and I always get a little nervous while I'm looking down, looking up, looking down, looking sideways, making sure they are the same block at this moment. That'd be pretty embarrassing if they weren't. Although you would never know. I'd cut them up, edit it out, and there it would be, right? So anyways, here is block number 4 from the patch party, the awesome pinwheel with the 4 patches out on the corner using the Michael Miller Cotton Couture and the Fairy Frost. Hopefully you'll be able to find all of these fabrics at your local quilt shop, an online retailer somewhere. Of course, you can get the pattern. The links, as a reminder, are in the description below. We are so glad you were here. We will see you on the first Wednesday of the month with the next edition of the block of the month, the patch party, and every other Wednesday with another fabulous tutorial right here at Making It Fun. Thanks for being here. We'll see you again real soon. Oh, and hey, don't forget to subscribe. Wow, you are still there. Thanks for sticking with me till the end of the video. I know, I get a little long-winded sometimes. But if you did enjoy today's video, make sure you check out a few of the other ones we've created. I think they're terrific. And of course, please subscribe to the channel. Make sure you hit the little bell to be notified. I don't want you to miss a moment of the fun. Stay safe and happy sewing.